Our gospel for today comes from Mark chapter 8, verses 27 through 38. It's found on page 34 in your New Testament if you'd like to follow along. Here's the good news for this day. Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. And on the way he asked his disciples, who do people say that I am? And they answered him, John the Baptist, and others, Elijah, and still others, one of the prophets. He asked them, but who do you say that I am? Peter answered him, you are the Messiah. And Jesus sternly ordered them not to tell anyone about him. Then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed. And after 3 days, rise again. Jesus said all this quite openly, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, but turning and looking at his disciples, Jesus rebuked Peter and said, get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things. He called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, if any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it. And those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life? Those who are ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with his holy angels. This is our good news for this day. Please pray with me. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be pleasing in your sight, O God, my rock and my redeemer. Amen. Amen. Grace and peace to you from God, our Creator, and our Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. If you can't read this, it says, don't believe everything you read on the internet just because there's a picture with a quote next to it. Abraham Lincoln. Obviously, Abraham Lincoln said that. Obviously. So forward-thinking man understood the internet memes. But I'm going to share with you today my favorite story that was ever published on the internet. That's a big statement. And as you know, as it's important for you to realize right now, everything on the internet is true. So I'm going to tell you about this article from that perspective. Whether or not someone someday tracks down the truth that maybe this story didn't happen as the internet presented it, that's for others to deal with. Today we're going to pretend that this story, no, we're going to believe that this story is 100% factual. The story takes place in Ohio. It involves a 50-foot tall statue of Jesus and a McDonald's drive-thru. Doesn't it already sound like a good story? According to this story, this 50-foot tall statue of Jesus was being transported from the place where it was made to Solid Rock Church. But apparently, along the way, the driver got a little hungry. He thought he could maneuver through the drive-thru with his 5-story tall Jesus in tow. But he didn't account for the far-reaching hand of a Ronald McDonald statue, which snagged on Jesus, causing Jesus to stand straight up, getting lodged between the McDonald's drive-thru and the play area. Now I want to give you 2 quotes that come from this amazing bit of internet journalism. Remember, it's all true. The first from a supposed McDonald's employee named Darren Bick. He explains the harrowing experience. It was the loudest, craziest, most disturbing thing I have ever seen. 1 minute I'm typing an order into the computer, the next there is a thunderous noise, the building shakes, and the face of Jesus is staring at me through my drive-thru window. He goes on to say, I'm going to have nightmares if I ever sleep again. And the second quote is really the whole reason that I'm telling you about my favorite internet article. It comes from the truck driver, the man hauling our 50-foot Jesus, a Mr. Fred Holland. He describes what would cause someone to attempt to take a 50-foot tall statue of Jesus through a McDonald's drive-thru. He said, I know I should have just parked and gone inside. But I truly thought I was going to make it. I don't know what it was. I think that I just had this feeling that with Jesus, all things are possible. Except for bringing a 50-foot tall statue of Jesus to the McDonald's drive-thru. I can't tell you how many times I read that article. It's embarrassing to admit it. So let's just say I read it a lot. And even though the internet may one day prove to not be a truly trustworthy source of information, I don't believe that this accident and that this way of thinking as presented by our truck driver is outside the realm of possibility. Many people do in fact trust things to Jesus that should instead be trusted to common sense. But why talk about this today? For this simple reason. Jesus asks Peter and all of us this one question. Who do you say that I am? Who is Jesus to you? A Messiah? A dead prophet? A good man? Is Jesus a magic genie that can save you from attacking Ronald McDonald statue? Is Jesus a fear-inducing nightmare like he was for the drive-thru worker? Or is Jesus a confidant, a companion, a bit of God that comes to you in darker times? Our inclination is like Peter and somewhat like the truck driver, to turn Jesus into our vision of Jesus. To make Jesus solve unnecessary problems in this world when there are much graver, much more serious issues that I hope God would tackle, rather than squeezing a 5-foot-tall statue through a drive-thru miraculously. Jesus finally gets it through to Peter that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days, rise again. But Peter took Jesus aside and rebuked his foolhardy death wish mentality. Peter wanted Jesus to take on the Romans, to lead to a military victory where once again the people could be in control of their own governmental destinies. But that sort of victory is fleeting. Even more fleeting than McDonald's French fries. Seriously, leave some French fries out on your counter. They will never go bad. How do I know this? The internet told me, so it must be. But that's neither here nor there. Jesus tries to turn our minds and the mind of Peter and the mind of the truck driver to answer this question. What will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? The real question is, what can you possibly do, say, or create in 100 years or however long a person can live here on earth? What can you possibly do in that time that will compare with all the time that you will spend in the life to come? It's a question that's meant to force us to reprioritize. It's a question to make us realize that past troubles and future worries are not the whole story of our lives. It's a question that's meant to replace our survival mentality How can we better protect? How can we put up higher walls? How can we hoard more for ourselves with more of a, how can we stand with our neighbor and build towards that future reality? And if we allow our lives to be reprioritized, we can see Jesus as something more than Santa or the Easter Bunny. Something more than the thing that we try when nothing else is working. Something more than a fear-inducing being that many are ashamed of. I'll admit it, when I read what Jesus says a little later, those who are ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will also be ashamed. When I read those words, I felt condemned. I felt chastised. I felt a little bit like Jesus was talking about me. Let me explain. A lot of the ways that many Christians use Jesus today and the words of Jesus, it at times makes me lower my head and hope that no one within hearing distance knows that I'm a pastor. What do you think about what he just said? In reading this passage, I couldn't help but wonder if I was indeed embarrassed of Jesus. But then I realized something. I had turned Jesus into an earthly thing. I was no better than Peter or the truck driver. Jesus is more than the words that he spoke to a first century Christian population. Jesus is more than the stories that we tell about him. The phrases we say he shouted, the theology that we think he pronounced. Jesus is even more than the being presented in the Bible. Jesus is a real being, watching us now, here with us now, guiding us now. And what's more, this is a living God. A God that came to remind the poor, the sick, and the lonely that this world is not all there is. A God that came to show people that God had not forgotten about them. A God that came to our world to remove selfishness, greed, and foolishness, and to replace it with selflessness, otherness, and hope. We are not going to be perfect. Hear this part. Sometimes we're going to take Jesus through the drive-thru. But on our better days, we need to let Jesus be the life-changing God he was and is. We need to free Jesus from the statues of a God that we would make. And we need to let him be the world realigning force that he was always meant to be. Amen.